As you know, the three of us were watching the director's cut, and as much as I think the theatrical cut was spectacular, I was blown away at how much better the director's cut is. I mean, it breathes, it leaves in elements that I realized how much I missed. It is a page-by-page adaptation of the book, truly. And so I'm fascinated when you see a director's cut come after a theatrical cut about what the conversations are between you and the studio. Do they single out things that they say you have to take out even though you know that they work? Or do they give you a runtime and say, hey, we really got to hit 2.5, take out what you need to get there?
Well, I don't know what it's like for other people. And this is a weird situation, I think, because, the conversation about releasing the director's cut happened very early. It was while we were still very early, in fact, in the process of cutting the theatrical cut. So what they said to me wasn't you have to hit a certain runtime. What they said was we'd really prefer not to go over a certain runtime. And that was 2.5 hours, which even that, I think, for a major studio, for a film of this size was pretty crazy. And I think only really a reaction to how it performed. I think without that, they would have probably wanted it shorter. So the way it kind of went down was I think there was a lot of eagerness about the film, and a lot of, there were high expectations with us and with Warner Brothers from the jump. And it was clear that I had a lot of material. I mean, that first cut came in at a little more than 3 hours. And kind of from the beginning, they were like, would you be interested in preserving that cut? And we could just work on it in tandem with the theatrical cut. So it wasn't,
that's awesome.
Yeah, we didn't go back and do it after the fact. It was all, they were running parallel. Mm-hmm. And what that did for me that was so cool, and I've never had an experience like this, is when we'd come up against things to cut for time, they never would say, you have to cut this. They'd always say, we feel like this part might be running a little long. And, from our experience watching it, we thought maybe this part of the movie was a little slow. Have you considered backing that up? And then I'd have these moments where I'd normally be reluctant and really kind of be like, I really don't want to lose that. I had this safety net that I knew eventually the director's cut would come out. So it was like, well, I'm not really killing anything. I'm just delaying it. And so my executives were, I would say, unnaturally kind and supportive of that, because, they would always say, we will make sure that it's properly, or if we were cutting something like the red bathroom scene at the Overlook, which is actually a visual effect heavy scene. Mm-hmm. And I would say, look, if we're going to kick that out, I just want to make sure we're going to finish those effects properly for the director's cut. And they said, absolutely. So yeah, it was a very weird.
What a healthy way to do
backwards.
it.
That's awesome. Yeah, it was great. Well, and it was awkward because, like, at the time, the release the Snyder Cut movement was in full force, and I'm seeing that go on, and I'm like, oh crap! Like this is awkward because it was just never really a question for us. And I think their situation is completely different from ours. I never heard anything to indicate that there was resistance to that cut in Warner's. I think it was just more about how to actually get it done. Right. Where for us, it was like, it was right there. We had everything. So.
Very funny that you mentioned that. Mike, that's the book that I just wrote.
Really?
It's called Release the Snyder Cut, and it's about that entire process.
Wow.
Comes out next year. So
yeah. I'm fascinated to read that book. I want to know all about that.
He will sell you a copy.
Mike, I will autograph your copy.
I would love that.
Mike, this is the douchiest way to start a question, but I'm going to do it because it makes me sound really cool. So you and I were at a party together in Colorado, because the Stanley event that Warner Brothers had was incredible. And you told me what I thought was the most amazing story, and I've repeated it so many times, that when in the early talks with Stephen King, that he gave you 2 really big stipulations. And they both kind of ended up involving sort of the third act. And I was wondering if you remember that story or could talk about what those 2 stipulations were, because when I think about how much I love the ending of this movie, you could make the argument almost didn't happen.
Oh yeah. Well, from the jump, the big controversy of this adaptation was going to be the ending, and in particular the Overlook. And if you've read the book, you know that, or both books really. I mean, if you've read The Shining, you know, one of the big changes that Kubrick made was that Jack didn't sacrifice himself to destroy the Overlook at the end of The Shining, which is a pretty sizable difference. And I think at the heart of King's very complicated feelings about the Kubrick film is about, you know, he wrote it as I believe anyway, he wrote it as an examination of his fear of what his alcoholism could do to his family. And he wrote himself hope and redemption and sacrifice at the end. None of that is present in the Kubrick film. And I think that because, you know, things always get changed, things always get, you know, adjusted in translation between the two mediums, and a filmmaker is going to have a different perspective on a story than the author of the book it's based on. But I think that was a bridge too far on a personal level for him. And so he opens Dr. Sleep, the novel, with just like out the gate, just completely undoes what Kubrick did. So just to unambiguously say, the hotel burned down, Jack died saving his family, Dick Halloran's alive. The end. You know, that we're going to start there. And so, you know, when I was first kind of having the very early conversations about this, I would talk about how strange it was for me as a super fan of King and an acolyte of Kubrick to kind of feel that tension growing up with these two versions of the story that I love so much. And that my feeling when I read the novel was that I loved Dan, I loved Abra, I loved the True Knot, I loved everything about it, but I was hungry to go back to the Overlook at the end. And that I felt like he defiantly avoided it, that it was, you know, he even staged the final battle on the empty campground that used to be the Overlook. Like it's like it's right there. And so I knew that was going to be the problem, but you know, his initial responses to everything was, you know, no Overlook, no Kubrick, and the pitch that we made to him was, you know, as someone who grew up with the film, when I read Dr. Sleep, I see the visual language of Kubrick. That's when you say Overlook, that's the hotel that I see. When you say Wendy, I see Shelley Duvall. It's just the way it works in my brain. I feel like I'm not alone there. And I feel like we have to use the same language if we're making a cinematic follow-up. So how about, what if the Overlook wasn't burned down? What if we could go back? And he's, no. And he reacted, but the thing that kind of turned him around, he reacted for sure. And then the thing that kind of turned him around was the pitch of Danny walks into the Overlook, goes to the bar, sits down, you know, the bartender in the familiar tux hands him a drink, and the bartender is his dad. And that changed the conversation. And he came back and said, okay, do that. And then if you're going to do that, you know, do it. Do the Overlook. More Overlook, the better. And, you know, the secondary kind of argument that we made after that was, which he recognized when he saw the draft, was that, you know, the ending of this turned out to be the ending of The Shining, the novel. And it was that really awkward thing of being like, I know you were upset that Kubrick changed the ending, so I'm just gonna change the ending, but I'm gonna change it to something you're gonna like a lot better, I hope.
Yeah.
And he did, but yeah, those were kind of the big. That was the nature of the conversation. Were those the two stipulations that I told you at the party?
Yeah. You told me that he didn't want the Overlook and to not change the ending. So in theory, like Danny would have survived, I guess. Yeah.
Mike, my next question was more technical, but and it was going to be this question I'm about to follow up with was lower in my notes, so I apologize, but I have to follow up with it now because of the answer you just gave. I'm just genuinely curious. What are your thoughts about Stephen King's thoughts about The Shining, in the sense of, do you agree with Stephen King's criticisms of The Shining? Because for me, I have not read the Shining book. I'll admit that. I'm a pure, from a film perspective, I've only seen the films of these stories. These two have read the books. They're much bigger book readers and King fans than I was growing up. So for me, The Shining is the ultimate story, and Dr. Sleep is now the ultimate story. These are the two defining things that I see. Do you personally agree with Stephen King or not about The Shining's issues?
Oh, that is such a complicated question. This is going to be really fun to watch me try to Neo my way through this. All right. So the short answer is, as an adaptation of the book, I agree with him that the adaptation is not a great adaptation of the novel. Where I disagree is that I think, despite that, it is a brilliant piece of cinema and one of the most important horror movies ever made. So that is the schizophrenia that I've experienced as a fan growing up, of having to, say, yes, it's absolutely right. Jack Torrance in the film is not Jack Torrance from the novel. They are not the same character. The message and the heart and soul of The Shining, the novel, is not present in the film. The film's about something different. The film's about different people. Mm-hmm. The film takes a lot of the mechanics of the novel and completely reconceives them, puts them in a different configuration. And naturally, that machine creates a different product. It drives to a whole different destination. Mm-hmm. One that I find just as thrilling, memorable, influential, complex, beautifully artistically rendered, this masterpiece of horror filmmaking. So I agree with him, and at the same time, if it had been my book, I probably would share the venom that he has for the film, but it wasn't, and so I love the film, and I've had this weird mom and dad are fighting feeling for my whole life. So part of this movie, I mean, you can look at Dr. Sleep as this parent trap that's meant to kind of force them all back together, force them back together so we can all get along. But,
it's so true.
That's amazing.
Twin Dannies.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think his feelings about it are complicated too, because I think as he's gotten older and his feelings that he stated about it in the past don't jive with the way he's described how he feels about adaptations to me. Which is he has a very fascinating outlook on it, where he has a lot of approvals when it comes to setting up an adaptation. Who's writing it, who's directing it, who's acting in it, the script itself, the whole vision for the whole thing. But after that is over, he really leaves you alone. And he makes a big point to say, this is your movie. I'm not here to interfere, and I'm just going to let you make your movie. And what he said to me when he saw Dr. Sleep was that he looks at it as he wins either way. That if the movie's bad, people will say the book was better. And if the movie's good, people will say, well, yeah, it's based on a really good book. So he can't lose. But that isn't how historically he's talked about The Shining.
Yeah.
And I do think that's because of how personal that story is to him. I think the insult wasn't in the changes that are made to an adaptation. I've seen other King adaptations that make changes just as big, if not bigger, that he seemed to be just fine with.
The Mist. The ending of The Mist.
Yes.
Right? Darabont.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect ending. He even said, he was like, I wish I'd thought of that ending.
Yeah.
So I've seen him throughout his career react very differently. I think, to me, it speaks to how personal this particular story is to him.
Before I ask my next question, Mike, I need to know, as a fan, which you clearly are, have you come to terms with the fact that your filmography has thick black lines connecting it to The Shining? You'll for always have a thick black line connecting your filmography to The Shining. You can speak openly about The Shining and about Stephen King's work around your work, and that has to be supernatural almost.
God, I don't know if I've ever really thought about it that succinctly before. That's wild. there were, yeah. I mean, I guess there were certainly times when me and Trevor Macy, my producer, and Mike Finignari, my DP, we've been together since Oculus. Really, there were times where we'd kind of hit these periods of quiet on set, and we'd look at each other and giggle and be like, "We're making the sequel to Shine."
We do that a lot too.
Like it's that.
Like we're talking to Mike Flanagan right now.
Yeah.
That's how we geek out. Yeah.
I don't even know what to do with that. I'm just like, oh, guys, aim higher. Yeah, I'm easy. I'm easy to find. But yeah, I would definitely have those weird moments of kind of realizing we were in the same room with The Shining. I always felt though that like King and Kubrick are these kind of titans. And we were very little, like we got to kind of perch on their shoulders here and there. And that was really exciting. But, you know, we were in these huge shadows of these giant iconic, you know, an iconic novel, an iconic film. And we were just kind of like getting to sneak in and do our little song and dance and then run out of the room before someone like squashed us.
Right.
But yeah, it is pretty wild. And to hear you put it that way is pretty insane.
All right. I'm going to, Jacob, before I cut you off, I'm so sorry about this. The True Knot. I mean, I'm fascinated by the True Knot in general as characters and, you know, the visual of the True Knot, bringing them to the screen and their bohemian sort of look about them. We just lost Joel Schumacher. When I rewatched the director's cut, it reminded me very much of the vampires from Santa Clara. And I wanted to know if that movie means anything to you. Did it represent how you brought the True Knot to the screen? Because, you know, we're talking timeless vampires essentially, and they just had that sort of tone to them.
Oh yeah, no, look, I love that film. First of all, you know, one thing about Santa Clara, all the damn vampires, like I loved that film growing up. What I loved about the vampires in Lost Boys is how they feel contemporary and old at the same time, which not only so beautifully ties in with, you know, the reference the title is making to Neverland, to the kids that never grow up, but how, you know, you look at Edward Herrmann in that, who plays a very unexpected kind of prime vampire, you know, and down to like, he almost looks like Matt Smith in Doctor Who, like down to the tweed and the bow tie. And but certainly I think with these guys in the book, there were a bunch of references we kicked around. We talked about Near Dark a bunch. You know, we talked about, we talked a little bit about the various kind of incarnations of vampires that you see in Interview with the Vampire, especially when you get into France. And even though they've all kind of been cursed with the long hair, the like 90s pit hair, you know, it still kind of led us to this interesting approach to them, where if you're trying to live through long periods of time in different generations and different decades, while also blending in to a certain extent, how do you carry keepsakes and influences from different periods of fashion and different things like that with you without looking dated? And in the book, they're in disguise in the book. They're actively dressing in this kind of trailer RV community. There's a lot of like ultra conservative and Republican t-shirts and hats and stuff in the book. Cheesy like fishing hats, and like they're really going for like, we're the harmless old retirees on the road. And our feeling was that could be funny. That didn't blend in really the way I think it was intended to visually. And what we liked more was that like they would collect little knickknacks through all the eras that they lived in, and they become these little kind of mood boards. And so you have like Zahn McClarnon's got artifacts and belt buckles and stuff that are like Civil War era.
And rings. I always love the rings.
Yeah. Well, it was about souvenirs, and it was about like, okay, well, you know, even if you're abandoning a certain aesthetic, you know, you keep the fedora, you keep the necklace. It's like, and it all mixes and matches to the point that you can't identify one particular time period or place.
Right.
Which makes it feel bohemian and current. And because so many fashion trends today have all collided into this kind of new reclaimed hybrid fashion. So it was a very weird little blender we threw each of them in.
I'm going to point out real quick
each actor,
too, when we were watching last night, when Rose was shopping, my wife said, oh, they poop, because she had toilet paper in the cart, which I thought was a very strange observation.
Did you see some of the other things that she put in? So Rebecca picked everything. Typically props will go through and build that for an actor.
That doesn't surprise me.
Ferguson,
she's awesome.
She's so great. I loved working with her so much. But she and I ran through the supermarket with a shopping cart when we got to set. And she wrote out the little shopping list that she's referencing, which if you freeze frame is hilarious. But there's toilet paper. There are condoms in there, maxi pads. Like, she really was... And she had a story for all of it, and like explained to me why Grandpa Flick needed the boiled peanuts, and why like Robert Longstreet's character is the one who asked for the Bud Light, and it's like why she thought that was perfect for him as this quasi-immortal character who subsists on the misery of gifted children. She's like, and Bud Light.
No, that's their slogan. Actually, goes well with
the next Bud Light commercial is going to be the Tremblay scene in full. That's going to be Bud Light.
It would make a lot of sense. Mike, I want to talk about the geography of the Overlook Hotel, which is something that I feel like Kubrick really didn't give two shits about, because like there is an overview, like, I got my little snow globe. There's clearly like an overview shot that shows that there is no hedge maze. They don't really establish where the front door is. A lot of the hallways don't make a ton of sense if you really think about where they're turning and where they're going. So in your sense, did that make it more difficult for you? Or did you just sort of say like, well, if Kubrick doesn't give a shit, why should I?
A little of both. At first, it was maddening. At first, because the Warner's gave us all his plans as well, his stage plans, and we're like, oh, we're gonna rebuild the sets like to the millimeter of what he did, and then we realized that the film didn't match the plans, and that on numerous occasions he clearly was like, oh, never mind, we're just gonna do this instead, and would make a change that wasn't reflected in the blueprints anymore. But we spent weeks in prep trying to figure out where the door was. Like where the lobby entrance of the hotel was from that overhead shot. We never cracked it. We ended up we got rid of the scene in the lobby where it came in, because we were so like, we didn't want to be wrong. And we kept going back and forth and being like, but Scatman Crothers comes walking into the lobby, and it's like, but not through the front door. He comes at it from a whole different angle. So we would bump into these problems. And for the longest time, I thought maybe there was some kind of hidden code to all of it, and that he was burying these different layers of meaning. But time and again, we would bump into things where it was like, well, actually, given the requirements of keeping an active fire lane on a standard sound stage, yeah, you probably want to cut a corner here and move it around this way. And it started to seem, the mystique came off of it a little bit. And it started to seem like he just didn't mind if it didn't make sense. And
because to him at the time, he's just making a movie. He's not making a movie that he thinks is going to get overanalyzed for decades,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And making a movie, on like where he's repurposing parts of the stages in London where he's building into the set. Like the little, we went back and forth about the steps. When you go into the residence, there are these steps you walk up into the Torrance apartment. But when you're outside and you look in, it doesn't make sense why any of them would be there. Not to mention the fact that then it means the bathroom window's the wrong height and it opens into the hallway anyway, which is the other thing we learned. Like the
were you just sitting there going like, "Damn you, Kubrick"?
A lot, yes. And we would say, well, clearly he's either playing one of the longest cons, with no guarantee that anyone's ever going to try to put this back together. Or really he was making a movie and didn't mind that the hotel didn't make logical sense because it thematically worked to help you feel lost and disoriented. And I'm certain that was an intentional element of his approach. Mm-hmm. But there were definitely times where it was like, well, they clearly cut this off because that was the limitation of the stage, or he didn't seem to mind that he established that the hallway, that leads to the Torrance apartment clearly forced the bathroom to open up into that same hallway. Yeah. And it was freeing in a way, because I tend to suffer continuity. And so my DP and I would look at each other and just finally be like, how cool is it to say like, fuck it? And we've been able to carry that into other stuff too, where it's just like, maybe this can reshape how we approach everything.
Yeah.
And either just be like, well, we're going to go for what looks the best for this shot. And maybe somebody someday will assign some incredible value, to this decision.
There could be a documentary about it.
I'm glad that you cared about location when you did your one shot in Hill House, because if you had just said "fuck it" in the middle of that, I'd have been really disappoined. What's the casket over there? Nah, fuck it.
Whatever, they're not going to care. This is about being crazy anyway. It was really. And there were times too, even when we were recreating certain shots where, we would, just for a flash, we did Jack backing Wendy up the stairs with the bat. And then it occurred to us that in each of their shots, they're like dead center on the staircase, which continuity wise, I never would have ever been willing to approach that level of a cheat, but he did it. So we were like, well, we're just going to do what he did. And lo and behold, nobody cared. Like no one kicks at it when it's The Shining. It casts such a spell on you. You don't question it. But people will play that bit in The Untouchables where Connery's tie goes up and down.
Yeah.
They'll play it ad nauseum and laugh at it. And it's just like, The Shining, that would have been nothing. Yeah. Like compared to what he was willing to like.
Well, also, I think Kubrick said to his team, like, no one's going to be crazy enough to try to do a sequel to this movie. So we can just throw the rules out. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, for sure. We there were a couple things we really thought we were going to step outside the box and what if we're the first people that show you walk into the lobby from outside? Wouldn't that be awesome? And we completely buckled and chickened out, because we knew the minute we established that geography, somebody online would catch the thing we'd missed, and they'd call us to, call it all into question, and we'd be embarrassed. So we chickened out as many times as we persisted in that.
Mike, I watched the director's cut last night. It was the first time I had seen it since the theatrical release. I love both versions. I think the director's cut is just a better film in general. I think they're both amazing. They would both be 5 out of 5s in my book, because they're truly some of the scariest visual elements I've ever seen put to screen. And I think a lot of what makes your movie scary is your editing. There's this razor sharp edits that you do, specifically in the beginning when the little girl walks up to Rebecca Ferguson, and those quick edits, those shots to the people in the forest. The way Kubrick did those quick little flashes too. I was wanting to talk to you about your editing choices, because those are choices you're making in post, not on the day, and you have to somehow think they're going to work. At the same time, I also feel like you use a lot of long dissolves, and I love the long dissolves. And I was just interested from your perspective as a storyteller, what you want to get across to the audience. One of my favorite ones is when Ewan's driving in a night shot, and then you slowly dissolve to him, this epic shot looking up at him, putting gas in his car. And I just find those to be such an effective tool. And I'm wondering, do you want those shots to remain in our memory and kind of fade with it? What is the choice of that as a director? And then also just those quick cuts that you do with that almost feel like you're getting stabbed. It's so sharp how you do it.
Oh, well, I love talking about editing. That's my whole trick, really. I came up as an editor. And that was how I made my living, and mostly reality television. For a lot of years. Yeah. While I tried desperately to peddle specs and kind of get movies going, I cut a lot of reality TV. I learned so much about storytelling and audience manipulation, because reality TV in particular is nothing but audience manipulation. Sometimes you're relying on the editor to create the whole story out of nothing.
My girlfriend watches The Bachelor. I understand that. And so she says like, "Oh, this is like this person's the villain." I was like, "What do you mean this person's the villain?" She's like, "No, you can tell."
Yeah, I watched The Bachelor too, and you can totally tell once you learn the tools. You can see when they're teeing someone up to be the villain, or like if you want to know who the three people are that are going to be waiting for that rose at the end of the episode that you're going to be cross-cutting between.
Yeah,
they'll tell you that in the beginning of the episode and the way they cut it. So I studied editing, up through school and then to make a living afterward. And a lot of the quick cuts that you talk about that are meant to be stabs, I'll just go back to Psycho and how to turn the camera into a weapon. That's an incredible lesson. I tend to come from an old school with editing because I learned how to cut using flatbeds and to cut on film. So I had to sit there and really sweat over every single edit I'd make and try to visualize it as completely as I could, because I'd have to physically cut the film. And I have to hang each little daily, up around me, and you wear the gloves and you agonize over it to make sure you get it right. Whereas I think a lot of contemporary editors come up on nonlinear software, they can just Control Z their way out of it. They don't have to visualize it. And that, I think, leads to overcutting. It leads to people putting in more edits than a scene requires. And that's that kind of, it comes from music videos and short form and the power to just cut the hell out of something, on a timeline without having to really think about it. And so in this case, that language is the one I'm the most comfortable with in making movies. It's made me a better writer. My entire directorial approach is about serving the edit. I never shoot for coverage. It's about shot sequencing. I do a paper cut. The edits are written into my shot list. Wow. We know how long a shot lives. I can say to an actor, "Oh no, I'm never going to be on this shot for this moment. I'm going to be on the wide, or I'm going to be on the Steadicam." That feeds me into this. So it lets me be very specific. It lets me move very quickly. This movie was really fun for me because we were directly quoting The Shining. I got to dig into a bunch of tools that have fallen out of vogue over the years.
It felt old school. It really did. That's how I wanted to say that, but I didn't want to offend you. It just felt like old school filmmaking. Yeah, that's how it felt to me.
That doesn't offend me one bit. That warms my heart. That makes my day. It is old school. down to the lenses that we chose, the way the shots were designed, and when we'd employ something like a long dissolve, which
love those.
I love them too. They're definitively not modern tools. And a dissolve is meant to create the experience of passage of time, meant to have you simultaneously exist in two scenes at one time. It makes you more omniscient. It pulls you out of the kind of A to B to C to D domino effect of a scene, and instead lets you marinate in it and soak in it. And back in the day, they weren't afraid to linger on shots for a really long time or stretch out a dissolve for a long time to let the two juxtaposed images actually work from a composition level together. Let the two of them kind of flow into each other and create something that's graphically interesting when you combine them, which is always a really fun challenge. That was absolutely a tool that Stanley Kubrick used beautifully. That I think has just fallen. It's like a split diopter. It's just fallen out of the bag, beautiful storytelling tool that just feels old. Blowout. Yeah.
Did you see Jordan Peele's split diopter in Us when she was at the chalkboard?
Oh my God, yeah.
Awesome.
Beautifully
shot.
used.
Yeah.
And I do a little fist pump whenever I see a split diopter in general, just because I feel like they've fallen so far out of vogue. Whenever someone dusts one off, I'm like, yes. And we were, we were playing with them on Ouija Origin of Evil at the time, because we were also going for that old school aesthetic and like the antique lenses and everything else. But in this one, it was really, really rewarding because it's such a deliberate and kind of literary story. It really takes its time. And I could always point to The Shining, which took its time even more than we were. We're pace wise, I mean, we're a roller coaster ride compared to The Shining. It would hold you in a shot until you're so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
By the lack of the relief of an edit. Like he used it to strangle you, and it's so brilliant. Modern audiences, it's hard to get away with that. And I got to push it a lot further than I ever would have otherwise because I got to point to The Shining.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so I'm thrilled that you responded both to the, you pick when to be frenetic and when to let the edit or the camera itself be a weapon that you can wield against a viewer. But also when you talk about atmosphere, Kubrick taught me the irreplaceable impact that having an unbroken long shot with a oppressive and syrupy sound design, like with that heartbeat or with that drone, how you start to feel like you're in a dream and how you cease to view what you're seeing as an objective reality. Everything feels warped and distorted and like it's creeping in. That's some of the lessons I learned from The Shining. And it was a real treat to be able to kind of to spitball them into this.
Man, that oneer on Danny on the bike in the beginning. Oh my God. I would love to have seen you shoot that. Cause I was like, how the hell is he pulling this off? It was such a great shot.
It's a shame that this was such a paycheck gig for you, Mike. That you just took it in between projects.
Yeah.
Your passion doesn't shine through in the least bit. I'm going to give a really quick compliment too, because we watched the director's cut last night. And my wife is a teacher, so she's up at earliest hours and is asleep by 9. We started it at 8, and she was riveted till the very end. Could not look away, totally fascinated. Casual Shining fan, and was just so compelled by the story too. So that is a huge compliment if you understand how quickly she's looking forward to going to bed. But there's
thank her for me.
There's something that I caught last night that I didn't pick up the first time through in the theatrical is your lead protagonist. Well, I guess it would be Danny, but I'm not. You could make an argument that it could be Abra or it could be.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But I'm talking about Danny in particular. He's a listener throughout the course of the film, and he is absorbing a lot of what's going on around him. And he has dialogue, but he doesn't have long passages of dialogue. And it wasn't until we got to the scene where he sits across from his father at the bar that he gets that incredible monologue. And I wanted to know if it was a calculated decision to not have him say a whole heck of a lot until he got to that moment, because then Ewan McGregor finally got to do all the Ewan McGregor things that we love seeing him do. And I was like, damn, I didn't even realize that I wasn't getting the full Ewan until we got to this scene. And it's so heartbreaking what he's delivering. And so I just want to hear your approach to that.
No, sure. Well, first, I think, and Ewan would agree that we need the shirt that says the full Ewan, and we can try to figure out what the graphic will be. But yeah, no, that absolutely. Dan is a character that, as King conceived him, I think as well, who has had an arrested development in kind of every sense of it. He never really was able to move on past his own childhood, and everything about him is about suppression. It's about burying not only The Shining, but anything about himself that's going to that's going to catch someone's attention. It's like the most pure you ever see Danny Torrance is when he's hiding in The Shining, and he can't make a noise and he can't be seen. And to the point that he's walking in his own footsteps at the end. He doesn't want to create any forward moving footprints.
Wow,
like this is a human being. Yeah. Like he doesn't want to leave a single impact, any kind of ripple on the world anymore.
Wow.
And our thought was that he's remained that way through his adulthood. He tries to leave everything that he encounters undisturbed by his presence. And that's a protective mechanism and one of despair and weakness and everything else. So yeah, the thing about the bar scene was, that was really the reason I wanted to make the movie. And in the way that The Shining is about alcoholism, I think Dr. Sleep is about sobriety.
Yeah.
And the struggles there. And that scene to me was always kind of, because it isn't from either book. And it isn't from the Kubrick film. So to me, the scene with Jack and Dan at the bar is the one the one thing really, the most important thing that wasn't beholden to any of the stuff that came before, and felt like the scene as a fan that I wanted to see. So whenever I got intimidated by the Kubrick stuff or by the King side, I always had that scene to hold on to. It's like,
did you write it early on? Did you write it early on?
Very early, yeah. Before I sat to write the draft, I had written that scene.
No kidding. Oh, that's kind of cool.
And that was my big pitch to King was, this is what they're going to say. So that was of critical importance to me. It was one of the scenes that really grabbed Ewan McGregor when he read the script, and he said, The Shining, he's not a horror fan.
Right.
And so The Shining, he respected it, but he hadn't seen it until very recently, ever. And he was like, yeah, cool, brilliant, Shining, great. I want to talk about AA, and I want to talk about Dan, who's 8 years sober. Ewan at the time was 8 years sober.
Oh, okay.
And so for him, that's what it was all about. And so, the idea that he would keep that kind of fist clenched around himself until that moment, and then finally have the reckoning and kind of let himself out there, and that would propel him into the final events of the story. That seemed really right. And the only other scene that he and I talked about where he felt like we really saw Dan was when he accepts his 8-year chip. So even that, it's the most words he says in a row until you get to the bar. And even that, Dan only really comes out when we're dealing directly with sobriety. Everything else he pulls right in, but there he would kind of step out from behind himself. So definitely that was the intention. It was always, it was such a tragic kind of fight internally because it was simultaneously the most important scene of the movie for me from a character and theme perspective, and the scene that was guaranteed to be the most controversial with fans because of Jack.
Well,
let's
I would
transition
argue
to that.
I would argue that you handled that scene beautifully. And I do want to jump back to one of my earlier questions, but I do want to tell you that the way you framed that scene is the reason why it works, is because you're from the side. We don't see his face until after the conversation, but you also set up earlier on that Danny and the mom are being played by different actors in general. So it's already set up. I mean, I didn't find that to be controversial at all, but we do want to get to that. But I want to go back to Tremblay for 1 second, only because this scene is deeply disturbing, obviously, I've heard we read a story today about, I know Stephen King told you to dial some of that back a little bit. So I guess there's 2-part question: is the director's cut the original scene you showed him before you dialed it back?
No,
it was more violent.
So the director's cut has it's interesting because you talk about the difference between the frontal and the profile in the bar. That was all the difference in the Jacob Tremblay scene.
Oh, okay.
All of it. And so the theatrical cut on all of his close-ups, we're in profile.
Okay.
And the idea was that if you're not directly in his line of vision, that it would be somehow less upsetting.
Yeah, it's not.
In the original cut, it's not. I know, it didn't work. In the original cut, we were always in this frontal locked, dead-on close-up. And in the version that Steve saw, there were 2 more stabs.
Okay.
One of which sprayed his face with blood.
And the spray is in the director's cut. I saw the spray last night.
Yeah. So then I guess that is, then that would be the version he saw. I thought we'd kept that out.
Okay.
Oh no!
But if he got sprayed in the face, that's what Steve saw, where he was like, "Ooh."
Mike, there's sprayage, man.
Yeah.
It was brutal.
Now,
So
this is a guy who ripped Georgie's arm off. Is what I want to argue.
This is the thing. We were really the whole evolution of this scene has been fascinating to me because yes, this is the guy that killed kids all over the place.
Gage,
not
Gage
just
and Pet Cemetery.
Gage Creed, yeah. And my whole thing initially was I was like, oh, this isn't going to be a thing because we're just not going to show anything. Like you're never going to see little. You're not going to see his little arm ripped off. You're not going to see little dead Gage with the autopsy scars. Like we're not going to do any of that.
Right.
we're just going to be here and you're going to hear it, which is worse anyway.
That's why the movie Seven is so effective, because the violence is all off camera and you have to imagine how those people died. It's like, it's way worse that way almost.
And so we knew that intellectually, like prior to making this, you could have cornered me and said, like, what's worse, the implied violence or explicit? And I would have said, oh, implied's always worse than the imagination. Yet we still foolishly thought that wouldn't be the case here. And that, you know, the book it kind of tiptoes around what happens to him. The book writes around it. And I thought that the movie would do the same. The thing no one was prepared for was Jacob. And we should have been. Like, I'd done a movie with Jacob when early in his career, when he was like 7 years old. And even then thought he was the best young actor I'd ever worked with. And so when we called him and said, hey, you want to play this part? And he was real excited about it. And he was like, oh yeah, I have a great idea. Like, this is going to be really scary. And we're like, okay, sure. And we all showed up full of swagger, and it was like, yeah, you know, we're just going to roll. We're going to have somebody down there flicking the blood, because we wanted a little bit of splash on his chin. Not what you guys saw. That was a little more than we thought would happen. But
you dumped the entire elevator blood on Tremblay from The Shining.
Sissy Spacek at the prom.
I was like, what's going on?
And Rebecca, who's pretty fearless, you know, was full of attitude. And when she met Jacob, who had been doing another movie, so we never rehearsed with him, you know, like I would talk to his father, and he's like, we're rehearsing ourselves. And it's really good.
What?
It's really good. It's really upsetting.
Yourselves? What do you mean you're rehearsing that scene yourselves at home?
Well, it's a very typical thing with child actors that, you know, their parents will run a scene with them. A bunch, in fact, before they ever get to set. It actually makes my job a lot easier when their parents are as good at it as Jacob Tremblay's are. But I knew they were working on the scene. They weren't worried about it. Jacob was really confident about it. He showed up he's the sweetest, most charming kid you'll ever meet anyway. And Rebecca was even, oh, get ready, Jacob. We're going to mess you up. Like, oh, true not. We're coming to get him. And they walked up. They were all like, that whole group of actors they're the bad guys. They get to strut around set in cool costumes and say cool stuff.
Yeah.
And so they showed up to it just cocky. And we started with Jacob. When we rehearsed, we didn't put any emotion into it. I was like, Jacob, don't scream. We're just going to walk through it mechanically, so you don't get traumatized, you know, and we'll save it.
Were you planning on multiple takes, or did you want to try to get it in as few as you could?
Oh yeah, well, as few as we could, but that was about his vocal cords. Okay. I knew he was going to scream. I just didn't want to blow his voice out. I didn't, you know, he wasn't scared of anything. The thing was, we were starting on him though. We started on his frontal and his profile, which were running simultaneously. And he's like, nope, I got this. And I was like, do you want to do do you want to do anything with it? And he said, nope, I'm good. And we all went to the monitor, and Rebecca gets all into character and everybody's ready. And his dad leans over to me and he's like, you have no idea what you're in for. Kind of smirking. And I was like, oh, okay. Like we know this is going to be a disturbing scene. It's going to be fine though. It's going to be, it's always worse.
Dad's on board. Dad's on board.
Oh yeah, he was.
Watch how my son can die.
Yeah, well, he's just smirking, and he knows what's coming. We don't know, and the general idea was like, this stuff's always worse in the movie than it is on the set. Like on the set, the stuff tends to be fun and silly.
Sure.
And so we roll. And Jacob just lets loose, and it's what you see in the movie. And he's just screaming and begging, and he's ad-libbing, and he's just throwing in pleas, and Rebecca can't get her lines out. Oh. He's just screaming over her, and he's crying. Oh. And Rebecca comes in, and she's like, yeah, this is gonna hurt because fear purifies steam. And then she starts crying.
Oh.
Right.
Oh my God.
And we're in the van at the time. We had all the monitors in this ride van on the location. We're all in there just staring at it, horrified.
Oh my God.
We get through to the end of the take. I'm like too shocked to call cut. He's just dead. Like he dies. And we're all just staring at it. And I looked over to Trevor Macy and I was like, what have we done? cut. Oh, yes, cut. And I go out, and Jacob's dad is just grinning, right? And so Jacob hops up off the ground, just pop, blood all over him. And half the crew is gone. Like they have abandoned their posts. So during the shot, grips and electricians and stuff were like, nope. And they just walked away.
That was Sean's wife last night when they watched the movie. She said, nope, we're fast forwarding through this.
My wife had to say, she had a blanket on, and when it was getting up to it, she goes, I don't think I can watch this. And we kind of skipped through it. And I'll tell you what happened.
I don't blame you.
This is how long it goes. We're skipping through, and I'm like, okay, I think we're okay. And we click it on, and it's still going. It's still going.
The scene is longer than Gone with the Wind. It is long. Like that scene feels like. But I guess I wanted to ask you. This is the question I really wanted to get from you. That scene deeply disturbed me beyond belief that I could ever. I felt every stab of that scene because of the way you did it. What is the scene that did that to you? That disturbed you that much?
Ooh. Damn. The first time I saw Martyrs, I had an almost impossible time getting through it. Multiple times. I remember the first time I saw, and you're asking for other movies, right?
Just a scene like that, that just
scene like that just
you up.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. So the first one in my life that messed me up that much was little Alex Kintner in Jaws.
Oh God!
Yes.
The way it rolls over, like right on the bite, which I've never really, as I've gotten older, been able to figure out what's happening there. But that one upset me profoundly as a kid.
Right.
And then another scene that I could never get past, although they pulled the ripcord, that didn't happen. But I was very young when I saw Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
Okay.
And there's a part in that movie where a little girl's like I think she's in a diner or something. And she looks over the window and there's this clown waving and kind of enticing her over in the window. And she kind of walks over and it pulls back to show that he's holding this giant mallet behind him. And I imagined that he was going to crush this child. And she gets rescued at the last minute from that. But that scene messed me up as a kid. I remember I wouldn't watch that movie for years because I just couldn't process that.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I will tell you, you're all that blood splatter and spray is right on HBO Max right now in the director's cut. That version is on there.
I want to ask real quick about Tremblay too, just for this reason. He gets cast and they say, well, they're not going to cast Jacob Tremblay unless it's a big role. And for a while, the rumor was that he's going to play young Danny in flashbacks, right? And I'm curious because you've said in interviews that you love to read reviews and you can't really stop yourself from reading about production. So when you read reviews like that, how hard is it for you to step in and just be like, just to weigh in some way, shape, or form and wait for the movie to come out and answer the questions?
That is hard, actually. Yeah. And that one in particular, because people were like, was clearly playing Danny. And I'm like, no. But I'm really not supposed to work against the movie until it's out anyway. But yeah, that stuff is tough for me, not piping up. And that one in particular was tricky because, Jacob's really in incredible demand. I don't think would have had time. And he's too old to play Danny in the flashbacks, but he didn't have the time. He only had a couple days to give us anyway. He was off doing all sorts of stuff.
Right.
And so he did it because he loves The Shining. Jacob loves The Shining. And we've been like,
he's an old soul, Jacob Tremblay.
No, he really is.
He is
like a 40-year-old dude. Yeah, Jacob was like one of the most professional people on the Before I Wake set, and I'm including myself in the other camp. Like that was my second movie, and I was trying to figure it all out, and Jacob just had it down. Like he's always been that way. But he was like, "No, this is real exciting. This is fun. I'd love to be part of the movie. It'd be great to see you guys again." Because like I work with the same crew all the time, and so he remembered them very fondly from the other movie too. And so like I'd love to see everybody and come hang out.
That's awesome.
But I was terrified they were going to leak it. And I think they did, actually, if I remember right.
Really?
TMZ had it, yeah. And that stuff always for us, it was going to be like, no one's going to think we're going to kill him if they see Jacob Tremblay.
Right.
Like if they see him pop up, the most recognizable child actor in the world, they're going to be like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
He's in this. And then when we kill him, people are going to be like, what? And so
You don't kill him, Mike. It's worse than killing him. It's like, it's worse.
It's
the Drew Barrymore Scream effect. Like
Yeah.
you see Drew Barrymore,
yeah.
and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
she's going to be in this whole movie.
if it
Not
makes
so
it really
much.
better, I still feel bad. And we did maybe 100 versions of that sequence over the course of post. No scene changed more than that one. And you'll see the artifacts all over. You never hear him full voice once the first stab happens. All the audio is pulled back like he's underwater, and it's like drenched in reverb and stylized. And you can hear the true not breathing way louder than you can hear him screaming. Like we did all sorts of things to try to like get away from it. There was a certain point we always knew was there where if we backed off too far, the scene, its importance in the movie would no longer be there.
Yeah.
And that without it, we didn't have the engine that launched Abra and Dan into the rest of the story and that illustrated the stakes for her. Like
Could have
what
put
could happen to her.
a pop song over the top of it, just something light for the soundtrack.
Ace of Base, something, just drop it in there.
we and I'm not kidding about this. While we were editing it, because you can hear, we're at Warner Brothers in post, and you can hear through the walls really clearly.
Chris Nolan's like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, there are other movies like Annabelle Comes Home was editing next door, and like there was this 2.5 day period where we did the first assembly of that, where I'm going through the raw footage and trying to find everything, and it's just screams. And so we had dragged all the audio down, and I would put stuff like Walking on Sunshine on really loud. Like not only to drown out the screams for the other offices, but because after a few hours of going through the footage of this, like I wanted to die, just in the edit. Like you guys, the viewer gets to endure that scene for I think all in, inclusive of the Abra bit in the middle of it. The whole thing's 4.5 minutes or something.
And then the dig up later is terrible too.
The dig up.
Yeah.
Well, that was a benefit. Yeah, that was that's fake up Tremblay is what we called him. That
was a little dummy. No, wait, really? We are a pun driven show, so thank you for that.
That's amazing.
Oh,
yeah, that was a little fake up. Jacob had his head life cast when he did Wonder. So we got our hands on that to make this dummy. So that's his life cast from that movie, put on this little statue that was all gutted, and it was horrible. And little fake up we kept in a wheelbarrow. We never wanted Jacob to see him because they were on set on the same day. It was like, Jacob cannot see fake up.
Fake up also have a grinning father sitting
yeah, that was Bob Kurtzman. Yes, like he was the one smirking whenever Fake Up was around, and it made it like the whole like chest cavity was open, and it was like a turkey carcass after Thanksgiving. It was so like it was way more than we were. I said to him, I was like, this thing's buried. Like, I'm going to see like the edge of his nose. Like, none of this was necessary. And Bob was like, wow, it's pretty cool though, right? So Fake Up was just hanging out, by the craft service table. And when Jacob hopped up and his dad kind of smirked at him, and they I'll never forget it. He hopped up, walked past his dad, and they high-fived.
Oh, that's
like his
weird.
dad just put his hands up, high-fived, and Jacob
weird.
walked over to Crafty to eat candy. Well, we were all like crying and fucked up. And it was we shot that scene on his 12th birthday, so we brought out a birthday cake after.
Wait,
This is all true, yeah.
You keep adding stuff that makes this way more unbelievable.
I know this is all true though. I swear to God. So it's his 12th birthday.
Jake, they shot the scene on his 12th birthday.
Yeah.
It was his 12th birthday when they shot the scene.
So we had a cake that was made in the shape of the baseball jersey with the number 19, and it was red velvet cake. So when you cut it up, it was red inside. And we brought that out and sang
bastards.
to him. I know. Well, it was before we saw what he was going to do, and we were all feeling really just like, it's just another day. Like,
yeah. Killing Tremblay
about it. Yeah. But then we saw what he did, and we all felt like awful. But we brought it out. We had cake. We sang. He's covered with blood. There's various pictures of him just like with his cake and the blood. And then he left. He said good night. That was so fun, everybody. Bye. And he left, and the cast recovered, and then we wheeled little Jacob out, and buried him. And then Ewan and Cliff Curtis had been, they had a later call because we had to do the death scene.
Yeah.
So they weren't there for any of that. And so Ewan and Cliff show up. They're ready to dig a hole. They're just like, hey, what did we miss? How was it? We're all like still shaking. And like Rebecca Ferguson just doesn't want to talk about it. And he was like, how'd it go with the kid?
She quits
She's
acting.
Like, I don't want to talk about it. Yeah,
She quits acting.
She quits.
And she did all of her stuff. Like all the shots of her when she talks to him and when he's like, is this gonna hurt? She's like, yes. And like all the roaring like in his face stuff, he was gone.
Right.
Like we did that after Jacob left set. She couldn't look him in the eye and do that. So
and I love your reaction when King says, we listened to the King cast and King said to you like, hey, that's intense.
That's too much.
And your response was, you wrote it.
It was I thought we were being like super restrained. I thought it was worse in the book, and it's not. But I thought so at the time. It's definitely not. And but it was really funny when he was like, "That's a little brutal, isn't it?" And I was like, "You're Stephen King. You did it. I didn't kill the kid. You killed the kid. You killed that kid and so many other kids." But it was the thing where immediately I'd been back and forth on the cut, and I'd done shorter ones and longer ones, and we were always negotiating it with the studio, and it was like some executives were parents and others weren't, and I am and other people aren't, and it was like this whole thing. And Steve was like, yeah, it's a little brutal. It was like, it's gone, don't worry, it's gone. And it's like, you got to get on the phone to post. It's like, cut the close-ups right now, cut the close-ups. And they did. But,
Mike, we are at the time to stop, but we got a couple more questions. Do you mind if we go a little longer?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, we have so much to talk to you. Yeah, Jake, go ahead.
Jake,
it's your turn, buddy.
Yeah,
your name is fake now. No longer Jake.
Fake
Hamilton.
So if you want to kill me in the next season of Haunting, I'm in it. You call me Fake Hamilton.
I'm good.
Okay, that would be fun actually.
So basically, what I want to start out. Yes, this is my break. I got it. So I want to talk about basically Jack Nicholson, because I think coming into this movie, we were all sort of curious about how you were going to handle, because even though it's a different scene, Jack Torrance is in the book, and so we were curious how you were going to handle that. I love that you bring in Henry Thomas. I think Henry Thomas does a great job. I was just sort of curious if there was ever a thought to do any kind of a digital Jack Nicholson. What reaction you've heard from Jack Nicholson, and if you've seen, there is a deep fake on YouTube where someone takes that scene and puts Nicholson's face over it. I was curious if you've seen that.
So we definitely, and I'm having some audio issues. Is that on my side or is that on your guys'
No,
side?
it's on Jake's side.
Yeah, it's okay.
You're fine.
I got the question. Yeah, I got it. I just want to make sure you're. So yeah, we talked about every option. And we started with Nicholson himself. We talked about de-aging, which at the time, I was really skeptical of the technology. I hadn't seen it done really well, and I was afraid of. The idea was that no matter what, we're going to rip people out of the movie right there. Like a good amount of the people are going to be bumped off of the trajectory of just following the film. And so we had we had a couple things to weigh in. One was whatever we did to Jack, I felt like we had to do to Dick Halloran and to Wendy and to Danny. And so that just explodes into turning the movie into something of a video game at a certain point. Then we're talking about 4 distinct avatars walking around, and we're crafting a performance that actor didn't give, which to me raises ethical questions. So that was the first approach. The second approach to it was that the rules of kind of a ghost at the Overlook, as Kubrick established, and the way they are in the novel as well, seemed to preclude a performance by Nicholson that wasn't digitally altered, just given the amount of time that's gone by between the films and the fact that none of the other ghosts seemed to age. Although we did have an interesting chat about Mrs. Massey in that respect that we could never come up with a good answer for. But then, we did, from the beginning, we reached out to Nicholson's team to make sure they were aware of the film. Just that it was happening at all, because there were a lot from the jump. I wanted the Kubrick estate to be fine with what we were doing. I wanted King to be fine with it. We didn't want to do anything that people who were involved with the original film would protest or feel bad about. And so we got from Nicholson's people, they said, Jack is retired, and had also, turned down an invitation from Spielberg to step back into the world of The Shining when they were doing Ready Player One.
Right.
And my thought was, well, if he said no to Spielberg, I expect he's probably going to say no to me.
He loves Oculus, though. He wants to work with you after that.
But the answer we got was not surprising at all, which was that he's really he's grateful that we reached out. He wishes us well with the project. We have his blessing, but he's retired and not not interested in doing that anyway. And then we went through a bunch of different iterations of what we could do. Now the closest I'd seen to technology that seemed to indicate that it could be used was a deep fake that came out while we were in post. That was Jim Carrey cut in onto it. And I was like, oh my God, that was really good. But at the time when we were doing this, we hadn't seen any evidence that the technology was there. And the only comp we could point to was Star Wars. And we were talking about Carrie Fisher and Peter Cushing and how that I found myself scrutinizing the technology instead of following the story when that happened in those films.
It didn't look right. It wasn't there yet.
It was uncanny somehow. And so our decision was, let's avoid people are going to scrutinize the choice no matter what. So let's avoid the technical scrutiny and instead just commit to the same approach we're using with the hotel itself, with the other actors, that we want to remind people of the Kubrick film without simply just copying and pasting it. And that way, Alex Esso's performance, while evoking so many notes of Shelley Duvall that I love to see, is still very much Alex's performance. He plays a different Wendy in that respect. And with Henry, the exciting thing for him wasn't the Jack of it. Like when I called him and said, like, hey, like I have a part that I have in mind for you, but you might not want it. Henry said what drew him into it finally was that he was playing Lloyd. That much like
That's cool.
And he keeps reminding the audience that I'm just Lloyd. I'm just here to serve you your drink. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and that was very freeing, and that we felt was actually Kubrick's decision when how he handled Delbert Grady. This idea that the caretaker who is absorbed by the hotel just becomes part of the staff and denies any relationship to their previous life, and it was like that's what Delbert did. And he said, no, you're mistaking me for someone else up until a point. And he only really showed his face once. And so for Henry, his thing was like, I'm playing Lloyd up until the very end. And then I'm only Jack for like a second, which took the pressure off Henry. But it was a crazy thing. Now, I have not seen the deep fake that you mentioned that they put Jack over Henry. I would be so fascinated to see that. In fact, I'm going to go chase it down as soon as we're done.
Nice.
That, that would come the closest I expect to the way the scene looked in my head when I was writing it. That's what I saw.
The moment
It honestly doesn't look that different than, because I feel like Henry there. I mean, especially the way you shot it in the profile, it looks very Nicholson-esque. Like, I feel like the biggest compliment I can give you is a deep fake. It doesn't look that different than what you guys did.
Mhm.
Oh, that's a relief. Because Henry looked, not a ton like Jack, but enough that we thought we could get away with it.
It's how you shoot it. It's the side profile. It sells everything. So you don't give the front till later. It's perfect. I think you did a perfect job with it.
Mike, there's even the moment when Danny is going through the rooms and almost having mental flashbacks really quickly, that the scream that Alex gives when the axe goes through the door, I would have bet that was you just used Shelley again. Like, it looks that close. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, that was an incredible...
No, she did the same thing. The first scene we shot on the first day of the movie was Danny and Dick Halloran on the bench at the beginning, which was so much fun, and Carl Lonely was so great, and like it was a great way to start our experience of making the movie. But Alex running across the street, and she just let loose with this Danny, on the very first day.
Yeah.
And kind of all of us went like, wow. She had a knack for channeling so much of that Shelley Duvall performance. But that the thing of her in the corner with the axe, like, she just did that, and we were all just bowled over. She's really remarkable.
I'm glad you brought up Dick, because we had written something on CinemaBlend about you doing a Halloran script. How far along did you get on that? And now that the movie is finding a bigger audience, like, we're thrilled that people are coming to it on DVD and streaming. Like, are you holding out hope that maybe that could become a story that develops down the line?
I am, yeah. And that story I loved. We actually had quite a bit worked out for that one.
Yeah.
I think there was, and that was meant to be kind of the thing I went right into off of Dr. Sleep. We were all very disappointed with what happened when it was released, with how it performed. And I think you're right. Like, the last week, less than a week, it feels like the movie finally opened. It's been really weird. And there was always this hope, in the disappointment of that weekend. And I think back to, like, when we were at the Stanley, Jake.
Yeah,
like that was back when hopes were really high, and there was a lot of confidence with Warner's, and the feeling when it came out was so profoundly disappointing and deflating, I think, for everybody. And Warner's, to their enormous credit, never came back and pointed at me and was like, well, what do you expect with your 2.5 hour movie? Like, there was none of that. There was all just like, we made the movie we wanted to make. We still believe in it. Who knows why things work and don't work. But the only person who kind of, at the time, really kept their chin up was Stephen King. And that weekend he said, I love the movie. And I remember when The Shining bombed, and I remember when Shawshank bombed, and I remember, and it just started to list off, and believe me, I'm not trying to put this movie in the company of those movies at all. But,
it belongs there.
But
yeah,
I'll say it belongs there.
It's a masterpiece. If you really believe that.
I thank you. I don't know if I'll ever be able to put it up on any kind of shelf in my mind like that. I'm just too close. I think time will hopefully tell. It would be great if it enjoyed that kind of audience love over time. But he said at the time, he said, give this a little bit of time, because the audience for it is out there. And over my long career, what I've seen is that, they find these things and they pick them back up. So don't read anything into this weekend or into the, domestic run or the international run. Just don't. Like, it's all about time. And, this past week has been kind of the first time since then where we've looked back and been like, I think King might've been onto something there. Because nobody really expected the recent enthusiasm for it, which has been so great. And the actors all reached out. Ewan was trending on Saturday on Twitter, and I felt so good for Kylie Curran, who played Abra.
Yeah.
And this was her first movie. And she, this week, is just really basking in a lot of what we had hoped for her from the beginning. And,
Gosh, she's
and
spectacular.
she was kind of denied. So, yeah,
I
she's
love
great.
She makes or breaks the movie.
Yeah. It only works if she works. And I love her scene of when she's Ewan. And she's like, I haven't been hungover in years.
Yeah.
She plays that so well.
She had so much fun with that, too.
That's a great scene.
But I think to your original question, you know, a lot of the plans and the enthusiasm that we had for Halloran and for other things as well, kind of coming off of this, cooled off very understandably with the studio after it was released. But I think we're learning that paradigm shift between theatrical and streaming that everyone has seen coming in the industry. And I think people thought they had another 5 years to really adjust their studio model to change with those times. I think it's already happened. And I would expect you'll hear a lot of people at Warner say the same, that, you know, a movie that would potentially have performed theatrically even 5 years ago, it won't anymore. And streaming has changed everything. So I think as more people find this film, and as it hopefully continues to perform well on HBO Max in particular, where it's really kind of popping.
Yeah.
You know, that I think opens up a number of avenues for other stories we could tell. And Halloran is absolutely something that I would love to put energy back into.
Is it disconnected totally from the Torrances? Is it its own thing?
It was very much its own thing. You know, it was. I don't want to spoil anything.
No.
At the same time, I'm like, but maybe if this doesn't happen, it'd be fun to talk about.
Come back.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back.
I'd be happy to come back. I'd be honored to come back. I think you know, Halloran was always more about Dick as a younger man learning about The Shining. You know, and the Dr. Sleep novel tees up a prologue for it perfectly with the story of his grandmother and his grandfather,
right?
Which he tells a little bit of in this, but the idea was to kind of to open with him, you know, as Carl Lumley, and then to find a way to go back into the past and kind of tell this other story that inevitably would, very much in the way Dr. Sleep did, inevitably bring us back to, you know, a familiar hotel. But I don't know. I don't know what we'd do with it. I love it though. And it was something we were really excited about. So I hope there's a new life for it out there somewhere.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we hope so too, because we love this movie. And I'm only going to mention this real fast because you mentioned Ready Player One. We just wanted to get your thoughts on what Spielberg did with the Overlook and that recreation of what, as a fan of The Shining, when you saw that, like, what were your thoughts on seeing Spielberg do that?
It was the first time I felt like Dr. Sleep was going to work.
Oh, cool.
It was really interesting. You know, I heard a rumor that was featured in the film. We were already kind of down the road on getting started in prep. And so we went opening weekend to see it in the theater, very nervous, because there's this thing of like, what are they going to do with it? If it's what we're going to do with it and we got to change what we're going to do with it. And, you know, like there's a lot of trepidation whenever somebody's kind of stepping into the same territory. And so I went in and got a big popcorn and sat in the theater, in a very crowded theater, actually. And the entire mood of the theater changed completely the moment the hotel was on screen.
Right.
And it was immersive, but the air changed.
Yeah.
And there was an electric excitement to it and a recognition. And that was a predominantly digital Overlook, which I think they did a really, and worked very well for the conceit of that movie, you know? And so for me, it was like, I loved the feeling I got being in that space, being in those locations, you know, even in that digital expression of it. And I looked around and looked at the audience and the grins on their faces. Like, some of these people in this theater had never seen the Overlook Hotel on a screen that size.
Yeah.
And so to me, it was like, okay, this reinforces the fact that there is a beautiful thing that happens when you put that location on a big screen.
Right.
It's a palpable and mysterious effect that, you know, fans of The Shining know all too well, especially if you've been lucky enough to see it projected properly.
Right.
but that space becomes a character of its own, I think, because even if you watched the movie on a 19-inch TV as a kid, the Overlook was built in your head. It was built in your imagination, and it burrows in and it stays there. And you can summon the texture of it, the look of that incredible place years later without having seen it recently. It's that powerful. So when you see the Overlook Hotel on a big screen, as Kubrick designed it, it's like stepping into your own memory. And, you know, that I think, you know, when Gabe was at the location itself, I expect he had a similar feeling, like you're walking into, you know, specifically walking into a memory, a childhood experience, and something that's only existed in your imagination. It's a very profound thing.
Gabe, come on, tell us. Wait, punch in here.
Yeah, Gabe. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. No, well, hey, well, where am I?
Hey!
No, I actually, it was an incredible experience. I waited to tell these guys until they saw the movie, because I don't even know what was in the trailer, what they would possibly know, just because it's such a special thing to think that we're going to go back there. But I told them as soon as they saw it, I was like, I have to tell you, I've been holding this for so long. I was inside the Colorado Lounge, you know, I walked around these, the steps and the hallways, and it's exactly that. It's a thing that you, like a memory, you would never expect to revisit physically. So yeah, it was pretty incredible.
Right down to when the first time you show Danny's boxes, you place him in the maze, right? And the maze is such a visual cue that and for my wife, again, who's a very casual Shining fan, you know, the first time you show Danny's box, she was like, oh my God, that's the maze from the Shining. And I was like, yeah, just wait. Just wait. You're going to see a whole heck of a lot more. Mike, we're really keeping you over. And do you mind if we just go one more round?
Yeah, no problem. Well, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for
we really
for
appreciate you. And
yeah.
This is a special movie for all three of us. We love this film. So this is all coming from our hearts. So we appreciate you doing this.
Jakey, why don't you go, and then Kevin will go, and then I'll kind of end it.
So, you know, I kind of want to talk about, you mentioned earlier in the interview about like the conspiracies and how there are so many like different thoughts of like, well, did Kubrick do this or did he plant this in there? And, you know, I watch the Room 237, and 90% of the conspiracy theories, I sort of went like, okay, like, all right, like, sure, like you're looking into a little too much. But then some of them, in particular, and I know Sean wanted to talk about this too, what the dog giving the blowjob represented, it might represent. That's never a sentence I thought I would ever say.
First off, is it a dog or a bear?
Or a bear, the bear man or the dog? I can't remember. But a lot of people thought that
I just thought it was a bear.
A bear.
It's a bear. Yeah, maybe the dog argument. Yeah.
But that people thought that represented that maybe Jack Torrance sexually abused Danny, and then they talked about how like the Playgirl magazine he's reading has an article about incest. And so I kind of started thinking like, oh, maybe there is some truth to that. So I'm sort of curious about your thoughts about all the conspiracies surrounding it, and then specifically that one.
Look, I find them fascinating. You know, I'm kind of with you. There's a bunch of them where I'm like, come on, but it's really fun, you know? And I think it's a testament to the power of the film that it ignites that kind of imagination in people. You know, when it comes to the blowjob ghost scene, I've never understood it. I don't get it. There's something about it that's so overtly and strangely taboo, that, you know, even down to the costume ass flap, you know, like, there's something about it that kind of takes this, you know, this hotel that is painted with this veneer of this beautiful classic kind of roaring, you know, deco 20s thing, and then just kind of randomly throws this idea in that if you're a ghost who's trapped here, you're just indulging in kind of the most primal instincts that you can. And that as much as there's violence, because, you know, there's a pornographic kind of element to Mrs. Massey coming out of the tub nude, and to, you know, a different kind of pornography with the violence and the blood in the halls. And then with the kind of bizarre skeletons in the lobby that start to feel kind of Disney ride, and almost like the ghosts are putting on like a display, you know, like it's very like, these ghosts are bizarre. I don't know what it means, but it paints this picture of this kind of endless, timeless, cycle of various kinds of abuse, violence, and sensory indulgence. I certainly am intrigued by the ideas of Jack's abusive parenting, having more of an effect on Danny than we're overtly told, and of Wendy, who is the one who witnesses this, of Wendy kind of having that repressed idea within her own head. It does not jive with the Jack Torrance on the page in The Shining, in the novel, which is why I have a hard time tilting there. He's the baseline for me for the character,
Is that why you didn't bring that character back from Kubrick's Shining whenever they all kind of gathered together at the at the bottom of the stairs?
I was looking for the bear.
Although we debated it. And there was a version of like, what would it look like if out of all of these ghosts, in this row, there was one in the bear costume that would just kind of be like, And the thing that killed me on that was there's kind of an overhead shot as they all descend on Rose, and my feeling was that it would just be ass. Like, because if we kept the continuity, unless we changed the story point about that flap being open, it would just be this big ass sticking up. So I selfishly didn't want to, have that kind of infiltrate the big climactic battle of the movie. But
that's funny. That's so funny.
But some of the other things we lean directly into, like the same Playgirl issue that Jack reads in the lobby in The Shining, Dan is reading in the hospice in the middle of the film when Azrael the cat jumps up onto the counter and he's like, "Oh no, you got your signals wrong." He's reading the exact same issue.
I did not catch that.
Oh
Sean, did you catch that?
No, not at all. No.
Wow.
Yeah, we had to track it down, and it had to be the exact. I wanted it to be the exact one. And Ewan was really excited about that.
Oh, Mike, you got some OCD in you, don't you?
It was quite a time. But yeah, and we were talking. There were conversations about a lot of the conspiracy theories and other things that are kind of buried in The Shining, and we didn't agree among the crew and the cast, which is healthy and fun. As to what we thought it could really be. But yeah. So in particular. It would have been something to try to put that particular ghost in. I just think from a blocking point of view, it would have just been way more ass cheek than the audience would have.
Talk about them swarming on Rose, though. I love the visual of overhead of the True Knot swarming on somebody who has just passed. That makes them feel most like vampires to me, of how quickly they move to get that steam. That's yet another unnerving visual that you put into your film.
There's also something really truly horrifying about like they're going up her face, like the face of the person going in the skin. So my last question is going to be this will be my last question. Then Sean will go, and then we'll end. We really appreciate your time.
Oh my God, thank you so much for going long.
Yeah, seriously.
But I really wanted to tell you something that meant a lot to me. As I rewatched the film last night with my wife, I think my favorite scenes in the movie are weirdly enough the scenes as he's with people as they pass. Ewan's character. And you're going back to what Sean said earlier about like him having that major monologue later on in front of Jack. It's an interesting thing because it's the internal moments of Ewan's performance that really blew my mind. Like the sweetness of his character as people are dying next to him. So I just wanted to say like that was something that really affected me as a viewer. I thought those were really super powerful moments. While not like flashy moments, they were very intimate and I just felt them on a very emotional, deep level as a viewer. That's not my question, but I just wanted to tell you that before you got off the call. So
thank you, and Ewan I think would thank you too. Those are some of his favorite bits. Thank you for saying that.
No, I really.
And if you,
there are more in the director's cut.
Don't use that as your question. Yeah, don't use that in lieu of your question.
There are more in the director's cut, aren't there? Or is there additional ones?
There are.
Okay.
They're extended. It's the second scene in particular with Charlie goes on longer.
Okay.
And that was stuff that I was really sad to see go from the theatrical, because to me that's where the title comes from. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful.
And everything before that when he talks about how he can see his twin sons, and he can see, you know, he can see, I think it was the little red wagon. Yeah. The little details of that kind of like, and he says at one point, like all his memories are laid out in front of him like a deck of cards out of order, and little things like that make me kind of feel like this is a beautiful way to look at death.
Right.
You know, that's the stuff that makes King to me. You know, we were always fighting to make sure that none of that was going to go out, because usually the very quiet scenes with the old man dying are going to be the first ones people are going to be like, maybe get out of there and go to the astral projection sooner.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are some of Ewan's big moments on set, and the actors who played those dying men were wonderful, and
Yeah, they were.
it was some of the most generous I've seen Ewan. He was really he took wonderful care of his scene partners there. It was really
the cathartic nature of that first guy, as he's like super terrified of dying, and then that relief he gives him when I want to say the older guy goes, "I can see my wife," and I'm getting like the hair on my arms is standing up literally as I'm telling you that. I just love those moments. All right, so my final question for you is this: you are in a very unique position to be the only director who's ever continued this story in cinema. I mean, in regards to like The Shining, now it's Dr. Sleep. You're the only other director besides Kubrick who really continued this story from a cinematic perspective in this regard. So I'm actually interested to know for you, now when you watch The Shining, how different The Shining plays for you as a filmmaker who made the continuous story. Is there a scene that plays different? Because your film, I don't necessarily think of it as a sequel. It's more of it's a continuation and more of a companion piece that fills in that storyline. I was just interested to know if The Shining changes for you now as a viewer, because you have that opportunity to have continued it yourself.
Oh, certainly. And the amount of time that we spent with The Shining, kind of all of us, watched it, I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of times ad nauseum in prep. There are certain sequences of The Shining that are enhanced for me in a pretty amazing way, because I've actually had to fight to try to get a lens exactly where he got a lens. And I know the challenges of the light coming through the windows in the Colorado Lounge. I know the challenges of trying to block on the staircase. I know how difficult it is to try to, achieve, how you have to break up that Steadicam maneuver in order to kind of take, in our case, Rose, in his case, Jack, all the way from the typewriter and up the stairs. There's a lot of forensic things to me that change those sequences, because I've had to take them apart, kind of almost a frame at a time. What's amazing, though, is that the mystique of the film has been enhanced. Like there's a sense when you make a movie that you'll never kind of be able to lose yourself in it the way a viewer can. And I found that to be very true. Each one of you has had a completely different experience with Dr. Sleep than I'm capable of having. And I would argue that yours is probably more fun. And with The Shining, taking it apart and being able to examine it forensically has not taken away that suspension of disbelief and immersion, and I can still get lost in the movie. And to me, that's evidence of its genius, because even a film I adore, that I see it enough times that I'm evaluating it on a technical level. I'm never an audience member again for that movie. The Shining hasn't felt that way for me. I still get chills. I still feel that kind of part of my imagination activated by the film. I still feel the grip of the filmmaker around my neck.
I felt that from your hand. I felt like you were grabbing my neck the whole movie, man.
I'm so glad to hear that, though, because you spend so much time on it. You get afraid that you get to a point where you're like, I don't ever want to see The Shining again.
Right. I was afraid of that, and we would say it. It's like, well, we're going to ruin The Shining for ourselves forever, But that's not what happened, and I know it's true for Trevor Macy and for Fimignari and for the actors too. We talk about it, how we still enjoy the movie, and even more so. I think, like, if you talk to Alex Esso or you talk to Henry, their appreciation now, having gone through and forensically taken apart someone else's performance. Yeah. Alex has an incredible kind of perspective on Shelley Duvall and on her approach to Wendy that no one else in the world, I imagine, could come close to having. I think she gets a small fraction of what Shelley Duvall was able to get, and we get a small fraction of what Alex gets. So it's a very interesting, kind of Russian doll. But
when did you properly revisit it? When did you properly revisit the film? Like away from Dr. Sleep, movie comes out, it's done, final cut, it's out there. Did you have like not a ritualized version, but did you sit down one night and go, all right, I'm going to take The Shining in aside from everything I've done? Do you remember that moment?
Yeah, it's when they released the 4K UHD.
Nice.
And I said, I haven't seen this. And I've seen The Shining a million times at that point. And so when that disc came out, we were already done with Dr. Sleep. And to me, and we had watched the whole cast and crew, we kicked off everything in Atlanta when we were getting ready to start shooting with Warner Brothers rented the theater, the same theater Rose and Crow are at, where they're playing Casablanca. We used it as a location too. Yeah, we rented the theater and they projected The Shining for us.
Because I'm from Long Island, and that title card, that is not Long Island. Nothing looks quite as beautiful.
Not even close. Yeah.
It'd be a bagel shop on one side and a pizza joint on the other.
We could rebuild the Colorado Lounge, but we couldn't get Long Island right. But we all watched the movie there, and all had a very interesting experience with it. Kind of from we are about to die, salute you kind of thing. Yeah. And even after all of that and all the forensic work that we'd done, and we had The Shining on tablets and laptops on set. We were referencing it constantly. It was always up somewhere. We had stills from it printed out all over the production offices. Even after all of that, when the 4K disc came out, I was like, I get to go see The Shining in a new way. And it was like, it's a beautiful format, and it was lovely to see it in a level of clarity and restored in a way that wasn't available to me the previous year while we were prepping. The beauty of how films are kept alive over a long period of time is a wonderful thing.
I love that you mentioned a movie theater, because I do want to ask you really quickly that you were talking about on the Kingcast being able to bring Dr. Sleep to Stephen King in Bangor. And I have this shirt because I bought it in that gift shop that's in Bangor.
It's a great shirt.
That the guy had. He had all the manuscripts in his basement that got flooded out. And I want to know, is it the multiplex that's next to the Chinese restaurant where he and Tabitha eat? Is that the same one you were in?
Yes, I believe that is exactly it. Yeah,
they took us there to see Dark Tower, which was the point of us being up there. We did the Stephen King tour, and then we ended to watch Dark Tower, and he showed up. He came in the theater, and we got to do a Q&A, and it was 6 or 7 of us, and they didn't tell us he was coming, and he just came in, and he had a baseball cap on, and he sat down at a table, and he took the hat off and put it on the table, and he goes, well, I guess we're going to start talking. And and the best part about it is, so Scott Wampler from Kingcast was one of the guys who was with us. So it was all King aficionados, and none of us dropped the ball. We didn't have questions prepped, but we were like, shit, we got 30 minutes with Stephen King, let's go, kind of thing. And it was just an amazing opportunity. When you mentioned the theater, going up there and him renting it out, I was like, it has to be the same one that we got to go to. So, and
he said, he was like, this is where I like to do all of the stuff when it comes in. He had seen it there. I think he mentioned Dark Tower there. That's his theater. And that's where he goes to see just whatever is out on a weekend that he wants.
The Chinese restaurant reminds me so much of the one that they go to in It Chapter 2.
It too?
When the adults show up. So it looks very much like that with the neon glow. But I'm going to detour away from Dr. Sleep. Thank you for all the time you gave us with this.
Of course.
To me, Hill House is one of the most masterful pieces of art.
Episode 6
that I've seen. Not just that, the totality of it is completely devastating to me. I've watched it start to finish 3 different times. The cast is incredible. The payoffs that you weave through it. It is a true piece of art. It's genius. And I'm terrified that you're going to do a second season because.
How do you think I feel?
Yeah, exactly. So I am going to just trepidatiously ask you what we can expect from Bly Manor. Is it a continuation of? Is it something totally different? Like, without giving away any sort of secrets or spoilers, just ease my mind a little bit about where you are with Bly Manor.
Absolutely. So it is a completely different thing. Okay. It's based entirely on not just The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, but on a number of other Henry James stories as well. Okay. He actually has some really great ghost stories, and we've kind of been able to fold them all into one new story. You'll see a lot of familiar faces from Hill House, but they're all completely recontextualized, and so it's a true anthology series now. I never had initially intended on ever revisiting the Crane family. I thought we were definitively done with them.
Right.
And I was really glad that there was not any pressure to do anything other than that when it became clear that the show warranted another season. I can tell you that right before, I'm talking 10 minutes before I logged onto this, I was in a virtual mix session where we were finishing the final sound mix on the season finale. Yeah.
So we're getting close.
So if season 2 is delayed, it's because of how long this talk went, is what you're saying.
It's because they're all waiting for me to come back.
It's our fault.
Yeah. And season 2, as I don't expect it to be delayed one bit. We didn't really miss a step, believe it or not. We had already wrapped before the whole COVID shutdown hit all the productions. We had a couple of weeks where we had to kind of figure out how to continue post remotely. But my post team also, who I've been with now my whole career, they cracked it real fast. And we've been doing everything on these virtual sessions. And the season, I love it. It evokes a lot of things about Hill House that I love and am proud of, while very much being its own thing. I think fans of the show, you get that feeling where you're worried about like something that you like gets kind of lessened somehow.
Sure.
If you dip back into the well the wrong way or one too many times, it's a different well, and it was specifically to prevent that. So yeah, it's pretty cool though. I think Netflix, they haven't announced when it's coming out.
They're so mysterious in terms of
they really are. They've got their own plan, but we've been jamming through post. It's been going great. It's definitely later this year. It's not going to get kicked off into 2021 or anything. And everything's on schedule. I'm really excited for you guys to see it.
Oh my God.
And I want to hear what you think of it. In respect to season 1, because
will you please come back? Can you please come back on our show when it drops?
Yes,
please.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, we would love to have you back. Kevin mentions episode 6, and everybody talks about the unbroken shot. But whenever I get to it and get immersed in it, it's not the technicality of it; it's the performances. Like, I can't imagine how much they had to memorize to deliver all the lines. You give them so much dialogue in that scene, and I can't imagine how many times that they messed a line or made you have to reset.
Yeah, well, it was funny. The actors, they were very terrified of being the reason why we have to reset.
Yeah,
it almost never happened. Like they were drilling that episode. We had the script for that episode was done long before we shot the pilot. So we started rehearsing. The crew started rehearsing for that episode before we shot the pilot. And the actors would meet regularly while we shot the first 5 episodes. They'd meet on weekends and evenings to rehearse 6.
Wow.
Okay. It was like a play.
Yeah.
So yeah, but they were to a person, no one wanted to be the reason why a shot was abandoned, because if you drop a line or something goes wrong and you call cut, you just have to start over.
Yeah.
And that was awful for all of us, like, because that episode required about 150 people to perform a choreographed kind of thing every take, and down to like the some of the people that emerged as the most incredible heroes of that were like our dolly grip, who had to pull off like 175 point turn on the Pee-wee dolly for that 17-minute take. We were relying on crew members who typically aren't put in a position of that much immediate pressure. where it's like if you're pulling off just a camera move and it's we didn't get that one, we'll go back and go again. It's not a big deal. But if you're 13 minutes into a 17-minute take, the world, and so.
Well, Sam Mendes talked to us for 1917. Sam Mendes, and he said there were certain times where you just had to be like, all right, that's good enough. Keep going. Yeah. We're not going to stop for that. This is something that they might mess up in that scene anyway, so let's just roll with it, kind of thing.
Oh yeah, no, and we would do the same. I was sitting in the tent, which is just off behind the wall in the funeral home for all those shots, next to the DP, and everything we could do is already done. Like we're powerless once action happens on a shot like that. And we would sit there, and if you saw, because Grips and crew members were pulling chairs out of the way and putting them back, and carrying bounce cards and flags and lighting cues in the ceiling. We had hundreds of cues for every shot. If you saw like a crew member like for a second in the frame and ran out, we'd look at each other like, can we paint him out? We can paint him. Keep going. And we would do this this thing of how big of a deal is it? There's in that 17-minute one, which was our hardest shot, you can see they go up on their lines for just a second. And Timothy Hutton at one point stops, kind of takes a beat. He's sitting in the front of the shot. All the kids are behind him. And he's starting to tell the story, and he stops because he just tripped on the line a little.
Okay.
And he stops and he turns and he looks over his shoulder and he's looking at me. He's looking at the tent on the other side of the wall because he thought we would cut. And we
were like, go.
Well, he didn't know what I knew, which was that the dolly was breaking and the chain was about to break on it.
Okay.
And we only had one take left before the equipment was going to break down.
Oh my God.
I didn't
no
know
pressure.
past that. Yeah, I thought that would just kill them. That would be the level of pressure they'd never recover from.
Yeah.
But yeah, he looks back and he realizes we aren't going to cut, and he just goes, and then keeps going. And there's
pro.
Like
That's
that.
a pro.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, totally. There's another Henry Thomas at the end of the episode, and we did the logistical shot that was the hardest is the last segment, which has got all the windows breaking in the storm and everything. And we chased Henry. That had the elevator that brought us down. Mm-hmm. After all that, and we only got it right one time. It's like we had a safety take, he's walking to the kid at one point. No, it's the end of the first shot. I'm sorry, not the last one, the first one.
Okay.
He's walking to see little Luke, and he steps on a flashlight and almost trips, almost roll. And it's completely full frame. You see his foot hit it, and he kind of has to catch himself from falling, and just rolled with it. And you see the light get kicked off. Yeah, just kept going. And because he knew we were at the end of the shot.
Right.
And so it's like little shit like that happened all over the place that we were just like, good enough. It'll be what it is.
You're going to try to top it in Bly Manor?
No. I can tell you explicitly. Yes, do not expect us to even attempt.
They're just going to
rapid cuts. Yeah. It's a Michael Bay approach to horror.
Oh yeah, like I told him, I was like, I'm not interested in ever doing that again. I feel like I don't have anything else to prove. And the other directors in season 2, the other big difference on season 2 is, I'm not directing all of them, which has been great. I loved it. It's such a weird new thing for me. But producing them, the other directors, a few of them would want to do long one-ers, and I would be like, "Are you sure?" Because just speaking as a executive producer and showrunner now, my priorities are very different, and my thing is like, I don't think you're going to make your day. So like it was really interesting, kind of being like, I really want you guys not to actively avoid trying to go down that road this season, because it almost killed the show last time, and I don't want to kill Bly. So yeah, it's the whole thing's very strange and fun, but I hope you guys dig it. I will absolutely come back and talk about it if you want to have me.
No, you can come back anytime you want, honestly. And we cannot wait to see Bly Manor. And the reveal of the broken neck lady makes me cry. Every single time. And it's now become one of those things, and I'm sure you have a few of these too, where you can't wait to show it to other people. And the minute that you get close to the reveal, like I turned to my wife and I was just watching her reaction. She just burst out in tears. So thank you so much for that, and listen, thank you for all of this, Mike. Honestly, this has been so amazing to allow us to go deep dive on a film that we love, on Shining and on Dr. Sleep, obviously, and all your work over the years. It's been tremendous. We can't wait to. Jake read Revival. I just ordered Revival on Amazon. I haven't read it yet.
Dude, you're gonna kill it, man. You're absolutely gonna kill it.
Isn't that fun? It's
oh my god! It's so it's unlike it's a different King, which is a lot of fun.
It is like cynical King. It is like dark King. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what I am so in love with about it. It's brutal, but man, it's fun.
Do you know when you'll get to start shooting that?
I don't. We're still really early. Like I just turned in the first draft. Okay. And am kind of, I don't even know what the theatrical industry looks like now.
I know.
So I have no idea. I'm with the same executives at Warner Brothers that I was with for Dr. Sleep, who are phenomenal, like wonderful collaborators. Mm-hmm. Kevin McCormick and Courtney Valenti there, who are just wonderful partners. So I know that they very much want to do right, by this project. We got to see what the world looks like at this point, what the industry looks like. Because
I can see the poster now. Revival starring Jacob Tremblay.
Jacob Tremblay. I'm just glad Jacob Tremblay's out there in the world now. That's really exciting for me.
That
I
actually,
gotta get you guys a picture of Jacob.
That was actually.
I bet I can get you a picture of Jacob.
Oh, please do.
Please
do.
We
would love that.
Take a picture.
That would be amazing. I find it disturbing that over the course of this interview, I laughed hardest discussing Jacob Tremblay's awful death.
It says a lot about you, Sean.
It really does. It really does.
I will say this, as somebody who goes to, I see a therapist once a week. It was actually therapeutic to laugh about it, to be honest. It actually helped me psychologically through that scene. So now I can actually watch it again and think of Jacob Tremblay and be okay.
Well, again,
I'm very glad for that, at least. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, man. We really appreciate it, and please, we'll stay in touch because we would love to have you back when Bly drops, and for anything that you do, you're welcome back
photo.
Here.
Yeah. We're all about to get on Twitter and tweet about how good of a guy you are. So prepare for your inbox to blow up.
Oh no, please, not that. Not positive Twitter reinforcement. Whatever I do. Thank you guys so much, and it's such a pleasure to chat with you guys. It's been such a blast. It's great to see you again. This is really just lovely. So please count me in on anything else that's coming up. Thrilled to chat Bly, and I will get you guys some fake up pics because
yes,
you should be the chariot that takes fake up Tremblay out into the world for real.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, if you ever want to kill me in one of your movies, I could be fake Hamilton and we can make it work.
I'm going to start figuring out how to do that right now.
Yes, a lot of people have been trying to figure out how to kill me.
Yes, we will make it happen.
Thanks, Mike. Talk to you soon. Take it easy.
All right, friends. Have a good one.